step 3, we're going to start the migration process with the SQL Server database. To do that, we're going to use the SQL Azure Migration Wizard. You can download this from Codeplex. It's not the only tool to use to do a migration of the database, but it's a good one. It's one that we're going to use in this demo. So once you've downloaded it, you can execute it from the folder, and you have a variety of options. We're going to choose to analyze and migrate our SQL Server database, and we have this database currently hosted inside SQL Express, and we called that database local database. So now we can connect, select the local database, next, and we're going to choose to migrate all of the objects there. We used a store procedure, or we created a store procedure rather, in the database even though we didn't use it, primarily so I could show you how the migration process would look. So we'll select next, next again, and now it's going to generate a script for which it'll migrate those objects. And what it will do here is do a compatibility check from SQL Server to SQL Azure, make us aware of some things and some anomalies that we may need to take care of. It'll also do some things on our behalf. So anything you see here in red, you should probably make note of. The one thing it did is it created a cluster index for our table, if one didn't already exist, because that is required by SQL Azure. So if I'm happy with the way that that index was created, I'll just select next, which I'm going to do. Otherwise I can go back and change it. Alright, so now it wants to know about our destination server, which is SQL Azure. That server that we created in a previous step, we'll go to the portal and get information on it. Here's the server. You'll notice there's no database. We didn't create a database. The master is created by default. So we'll create that in this step. But first I need to copy the server name. And I'll just paste that up here over where I have server. Your server name will be different from mine, so just make note of what your server name is. Here I'll say Jeff Nuck at, and again the server name. Provide my password, and I'll just list all of the databases. There won't be anything there other than the master, but I'll select connect. Here we will create the database. So we're going to create our Azure database. I'm going to call it I'll call it Easy Azure Database. There we go, if I can spell. And I'm just going to leave the default here as the 1 GB because we're not going to do any partitioning or sharding, and we have a very small database for the purpose of this demonstration. So I'll select Create Database. I'll select Next. Now it's going to execute the script that it has created for us against that database for to migrate the actual schema objects. Now that it has been done, it says that it has created the table people. It's also created the store procedure, Azure SP get people. So we should be able to close this now and go up to our database here and refresh this in our portal. So if I refresh this and we drill back down into the database server, we'll see here's our Easy Azure database. Now I can manage this database and make sure and confirm that all the objects have migrated successfully. So I'll need to log in. And once we've logged in successfully, let me bring this up full screen. We'll see that we have a people database. It should bring up our table there. We also notice that there is a stored procedure that it migrated over. Now you'll notice that while it migrated over these objects, it did not migrate the data. So certainly I could go through here and add data to it. You know, I could add rows, etc. But realistically, we'd want to migrate these over in a separate step. There's various ways of doing it. I'm going to show you a real simple one by firing up SQL Server Management Studio. You can use SQL Server Integration Services or BCP. You can create your own scripts and execute them against the database here. Essentially what I'm going to do is log into my local database, and I'm going to drill down into our local database that we created in the previous step. And I'm going to simply right click out here, and I'm going to select tasks, and then I'm going to select export data. So once we go to export data, it brings up the wizard here. I can choose the data source, which obviously is our local database. I'll give it a second to process. I got lots of things running on my laptop now. it's taking a little longer than I expected. There we go. So it'll suggest to me what the data source client connectivity I should use. That is certainly fine for this. I'll select next. Those defaults look good to me. I'm going to pick the destination as the SQL Azure database. In this case, I'm going to use a different client and data provider to connect to. I'm going to use the .NET Framework one, the one I'm most familiar with working with as a developer. But we're going to put in some information in here, so pay attention to these. Let's see, the first of which is going to be, let me get in here, so there's my user ID, which if you recall should be Jeff Nuck at our server name, so paste that in and type in your password. We'll also need the data source, which is our server name .database.windows.net. If you're not sure what it was, you can always go back to the portal and copy it, as I'll do here. So I'll demonstrate. Once you select on the database server, over in the right in properties, you'll see the fully qualified DNS name, and that is what we need to put in that data source field. So I'll copy that, go back and put that in the data source field. And if you've plugged those things in right, you look at the initial catalog and you should get a drop-down list and see the Easy Azure database that we created. And now we can select Next. Here we're going to copy the data, one or more tables and views. And that's fine. We're going to select the Edit Mapping here, because while we're going to bring these things over, these identity fields we will not need. So I'm not going to map that to the destination. I'm going to choose to select to ignore it, otherwise we may get an error. So I'll select OK and Next. Give this a second to run. It appears I have one too many things running on my laptop. Deepak, I need a new laptop. Okay, now I'll select Next. There's nothing else I need to do here really, except the defaults. I can opt to save this package to rerun it again later. I'm just going to go ahead and let it run immediately now. And select Finish. If everything completes successfully, which is fine, everything moves, says 2 rows were transferred over. I should now be able to close this, go back into my database. In fact, if I go back to the other window where we were at before, I should be able to go back and refresh this a little bit now and look at the data. I may have to reconnect. Type in my password. And if I drill down into my table now and I select on data, you'll see that it migrated over both my name and Bill Gates' name. So our entire SQL Server database, the stored procedures, and all of its content has now been migrated from SQL Server up to SQL Azure. In the next step, we'll talk about how to migrate the application.